Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to another book review. In this series I not only review books, I also do literary analysis, readings and riddles, and essentially sharing my love of the written word from history. And often actually I think these words have their roots in prehistory, in so much as these stories, these histories, these riddles, these nuggets of information and wisdom are passed down for generations, thousands of years before someone sees fit to write them down, or at least write down a version of them. And so today I'm going to be continuing my quest to share with you some of my favourite tales from my childhood in Wales. They've been instrumental to who I am as a person, and I love the way that they are attached to places, often archaeological monuments even. They story the landscape, populated with a mythology all of its own. And hopefully in these strange days of 2020 they are a comfort and something wholesome, something exciting, something distracting, something fantastical to enjoy. This week we're going to be continuing to examine the Red Dragon of Wales. Last week we heard about the struggle between the red and the white dragon. They were sleeping in a hole in the ground beneath where a tower was being built, and how when they burst out of the ground, the red and white dragon fought hideously. The noises were immense, and the fire and the smoke, and also of course the young Merlin who predicted all of it. And this week we're going to be looking at the prequel to that story. George Lucas was not the first to do a prequel. In fact, actually, fun fact, the second Indiana Jones movie is a prequel. Steven Spielberg did one. Yeah, it's set before Raiders in the timeline. Anyway, this is a prequel. It was written down after that story that we heard last week, and it is the story of Lludd and Llefelys, two brother kings who come across the dragons during the course of the story, and explains how and why the dragons end up in Snowdonia. In this tale they're in the south of Wales in the Cambrian Mountains. Now the earliest versions of this story actually exist in certain manuscripts of Brit y Brenhinedd, a series of Welsh adaptations of Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, History of the Kings of Britain. Lludd and Llefelys also survives in the Red Book of Her Guest, and in pieces in the White Book of Ddraig, which are actually the two source texts for the Mabinogion, which I believe was compiled in the 19th century, much later anyway. But elements of this story predates all of those texts and actually shares some details with elements of Irish mythology. So maybe there's a shared ancestor to this tale in Irish and Welsh mythologies further back, possibly even, for example, in the Bronze Age. So it's a very old story which has seemingly been formed to fit in with the story of the Red and White Dragon in Snowdonia later on. It's an interesting winding road that has been woven in the writing of this story. But before we dive into it, I want to talk a little bit about pronunciation. A note on pronunciation, in so much as Welsh is often portrayed as a language which is hard to pronounce. It's the first thing I hear whenever friends of mine from England go on holiday to Wales, for example, and then come back. Oh, it's impossible. Everywhere you go, you need a pint of phlegm in your throat to say anything. All the double letters, it's blah, blah, blah. And often they'll say, "What does that word on the road mean?" And they go araf. Araf is slow. It's not hard to say. But it's interesting how people, in particular, I think English speakers, trip themselves up with different sentence structures or pronunciation and spellings that look complicated. The irony is actually in Welsh, in the Welsh language, once you learn the alphabet, and the alphabet does include some letters which are double letters, like double D, for example, double L, you know how to pronounce every word in the language. There's no alternative versions of vowels. There's no silent letters, as there are, for example, in English. And when Welsh borrows a word from another language, it tends to spell it phonetically in Welsh. Therefore, you know how to pronounce it when you see it on the screen or on paper. I guess two of the main stumbling blocks for English speakers are the double L and the double D. So I'm going to give you a little cheat sheet here. Double L is it's not as people would say. It's actually th, th. So it's as though you're going to say l. So your tongue goes to the top of your mouth, but then you sort of blow underneath your tongue gently. You don't shower someone with spit. You just gently say th, th. So Llandudno, Llangollen, this kind of thing. That's how you say the double L. Th. It's not. The double D is a bit like th, like th, but it's more like the. It's more like a more active th. So rhydderch, for example, rhydderch. And I suppose the third thing I guess I would mention at this point is nasal noises. So actually, rhydderch, it comes kind of through the nose. The RH, rhydd, is sort of there-ish. It exists somewhere up here in your face. So there are some hurdles to get over when you're pronouncing these words as someone who's never spoken Welsh before. But once you break it down, once you actually commit to looking at the word in front of you instead of saying, nope, can't do it, can't say it, it's impossible, then it's much easier than it may at first seem. I just thought I'd just mention that because it's one of the first things that people normally throw at Welsh speakers. So a couple of other things as well. The letter F is more like the letter V in English. So, but actually also English has F and V noises. If you think about knife and knives, in Welsh we would call it a mutation. They're changing, or one is changing a letter or altering it to fit the word. But in English it's just two separate words, or two separate letters of way of saying. So F and V, but in Welsh F tends to be V, and also the letter Y instead of y, it's more like a kind of noise. So Ddraig, Goch, for example. Notice the Ddraig in dragon, Goch. It's just like, but you know, again, it's not as dramatic as people say. It's not all phlegm and spit, is what I'm getting at. So I just thought I'd just address that because it's often an accusation thrown at Welsh. It's not a phlegmy language. We use our mouths, our nose, and our throats to say these words. Today's version of Lludd and Llefelys is coming from Welsh Legends and Myths, 80 Myths and Legends from across Wales by Graham Watkins. My version is available on Kindle, and it was a very reasonable price for 80 stories. So definitely, if you have time or the inclination, why not check it out? Not a sponsor. Anyway, let's dive in. This is chapter 42 in his book, A Ddraig Goch, the Red Dragon. Ancient Welsh legends tell of the time when strange beasts walked the earth, and a red dragon lived high in the Cambrian mountains. That's down in the south, well, further south than I was born anyway, but mid and South Wales. It harmed no one and was respected by the people. The land of Wales was at peace, and when Prince Lludd inherited the throne, he was content to share his kingdom with the great beast. The kingdom prospered and grew larger than it is today, covering most of Britain, and King Lludd built a new city called Caer Lludd, later to be called London. It all sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But there's always a but. An evil tribe of dwarves named the Coroneid lived to the east. The Coroneid had ears that were so sensitive they could hear a whisper on the wind. They heard their neighbours in the west talking about their good fortune and grew jealous. The Coroneid invaded King Lludd's land, armed with 3 weapons. The first of these weapons was their hearing. Because the Coroneid could hear every word ever spoken, it was impossible to plot their downfall. The Coroneid knew everything the Welsh planned, and were ready for everything the desperate defenders attempted. The second weapon was a fearsome white dragon, which breathed fire and scorched everything in its path. The red dragon of Wales, woken from its peaceful dreams, rose up, and the 2 mighty beasts became locked in a fearsome battle. They flew into the air, spitting plumes of fire. They clawed at each other with sharpened talons, ripping flesh as they fell to the earth. Their tails flailed the ground as they locked in combat, and the screams of the battling dragons caused women to miscarry, and animals simply dropped dead where they stood with fear. The battle between the giants continued for years, as the beasts thundered back and forth across the land. Fertile land, trampled by the powerful dragons, turned to barren rock. Plants withered and blew away. A desert of sorts followed in their wake. The third weapon the invaders brought with them was a wicked magician, who each night plundered the grain from the storehouses of the kingdom. Every night guards would lock themselves in the storehouses, but always fell asleep, victims to the magician's spells. Each morning when they awoke, the grain was gone. With no grain there was no flour, and the bakers would bake no bread. With no bread to eat, the people began to starve. But still the Coroneid advanced, and the dragons battled. King Lludd left his kingdom and travelled to France, where his wise brother Llefelys was king. I think Llefelys had married the daughter of the previous king of the Gauls, I guess. So he'd married in, as it were. "Tell me, brother, what can I do to stop the Coroneid? I fear my kingdom is lost," he cried. The 2 kings spoke quietly together, using a brass horn to hide their words from the Coroneid. "I hear tell there is a poisonous oil made from boiled insects," said Llefelys, "that will not harm your people, but when sprinkled on the Coroneid will kill them instantly," said King Llefelys. "But how will I catch them?" asked King Lludd. "You must trick the invaders and trap them," replied the wise brother. "The dragons are destroying the land. What is to be done to stop their battle?" cried King Lludd. "Your red dragon is a brave beast, but he can never win against the evil white dragon. There is only one way to end the fight," answered Llefelys. "Truly you are wise, my brother, but do you in fact know how I can stop the terrible battle between the dragons that's ravaging our land, and how we can stop that magician stealing our food every night?" asked King Lludd. "Come here," whispered King Llefelys. "Listen carefully." King Lludd moved closer to his brother and pressed the brass tube tightly against his ear, so he could hear in secret. Oh, brilliant. Okay, yes, I think I've got it. Okay. Let me put the tube down. When King Lludd returned to Wales, he did so with a cask of the boiled oil, the bug poison that King Llefelys' court had prepared, and he ordered all of his nobles to gather together for a secret council. "We cannot win this war against the Coroneid," he said. "We must surrender and show our respect to the invaders. Send a messenger inviting them to the castle tomorrow to accept our homage," in his best kingly voice. But the Coroneid did not need a messenger. They had heard his words from afar. The next day the people of Wales gathered to greet their new masters. The coronet arrived with a fanfare of trumpets. King Lludd waited until all his enemies were together in the castle, and then gave a loud cry. It was the signal to his warriors waiting on the ramparts. They showered poison oil over the throng below. It was harmless to the king's subjects, but every invader was killed instantly. Later that night, the king locked himself away in the castle's grain store and hid in a large barrel of icy water. As it grew dark, a terrible sleepiness came over the king, but the freezing water kept him awake. His arms and legs grew numb, and he shook with the cold as he waited, and then a strange light appeared in the room, and King Lludd saw a little man suddenly busy moving sacks of corn and grain. The man wore a strange cloak and muttered as he worked. It was the evil magician stealing more grain. The king leapt out of the barrel and seized the man. "Don't hurt me," snivelled the magician. "Promise never again to steal our food or harm my people in any way, and I will let you go," cried the king. "I honour you, great King Lludd. The coronet tricked me and made me steal from you. You have my pledge," promised the magician, and swore a magic oath that he would keep his word. The invaders were gone, but their ferocious white dragon was still at war, battling with the red dragon. King Lludd gave orders for a huge pit to be dug. The men filled the pit with mead and covered it with cloth. As the two giant beasts fought, they fell into the pit, and thirsty from years of fighting, drank their fill of mead. Both dragons fell into a drunken sleep. The king's men tied them both with stout ropes and buried them in a stone vault deep beneath the mountain of Dinas Emrys in Snowdonia, where, according to the Mabinogion, they remain until this day. But of course we know that young Merlin uncovers them. The king, however, was proud of the Red Dragon of Wales that had fought so valiantly and for so long to protect his kingdom. He had the Red Dragon secretly removed from the vault and taken to the dark forest of Radnor, a lonely place where he could sleep and recover from its wounds. To protect the dragon from evil, the king ordered that 4 churches be built around the forest. They were all dedicated to St. Michael, and it is said that if any of the churches are ever destroyed, the Red Dragon of Wales will rise up from its secret hiding place, ready to battle once more. So there is a little bit of an inconsistency there in terms of the end of that story and how it relates to Dinas Emrys. But I think you can see how it tries to explain where the dragon came from. And essentially the dragon was living in the mountains of Wales until it was disturbed by the invader's white dragon. So, once again, real-life locations turn up in these tales. Dinas Emrys, the hill where the dragons rested, for a while at least, according to this story. Llefelys is mentioned as London, or what would become London. France, the kingdom of Llefelys. All real places, though the characters are likely mythological as opposed to historical or even geographical, for that matter. Lludd himself is thought to be a mythological character tied to an even older deity or demigod, whose origin point is actually shared in Irish mythology with this very similar character. It's interesting how, in that sense then, Lludd is a character who is being represented and repackaged for the audience of the day in a political and geographical scenario that would be familiar to people who heard the tale. That said, though, not all the characters are necessarily purely mythological. The coronet, even though they are dwarfs, could be Romans, actually, certainly according to some. And I know last week we heard that the white dragon was brought with the Saxons, but it may well be that the white dragon in this tale was brought with the Romans. There's an anecdotal, well, there's an interesting correlation in terms of them being called dwarves, because actually, as far as we can tell, city-dwelling Romans probably were shorter than their non-urban or non-intensively urban Northern European counterparts. So perhaps actually the Romans were dwarves in that sense. But then bringing the white dragon potentially as a symbolic element, and then it being attached to the Saxons, could be a continuation of real history, where the Romans turned up in Britain, and then towards the end of their time here, they invited in Saxons, often as mercenaries, and also to settle. They had been raiding the Roman eastern shoreline in Britannia for a long time, a bit like Vikings, in fact, Roman Vikings, and they invited them in to settle here, and almost possibly passing on the white dragon of oppression to those people. So it's interesting how possible histories, possible truths are wrapped up in mythology and embellishment and good storytelling, and presented to an audience in a way that's relevant to their lives now, as it were, contemporarily, when they're hearing the tale being told. According to my notes here, Lludd Llaw Eriant, Lludd of the Silver Hand, son of Beli Mawr, or Heli the Great, is a legendary hero from Welsh mythology. He's probably the source of King Lludd, which is a very crude anglicisation of Lludd, from Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain. If you look up Lludd, in fact, it's interesting. Lludd, Welsh, Lludd map Beli Mawr, son of Heli the Great, according to Geoffrey of Monmouth's legendary History of the Kings of Britain and related medieval texts, was a king in pre-Roman times of Britain who founded London. So again, this coronated Roman connection, potentially. And he's buried at Ludgate, which is a real place in London. So Ludgate, Lludd, gate actually itself comes from later on. That's I think an Old Norse import, gata, street. So there's all sorts of interesting little tidbits sprinkled throughout this that attach the mythology to the real world. It is the tale of Lludd and Llefelys in the Mabinogion which influenced Geoffrey of Monmouth's work, or well, in the source text for the Mabinogion, that influenced Geoffrey of Monmouth's work. And according to Geoffrey of Monmouth, he is the ruler of Britain, while of course Llefelys ruled Gaul, or France. And there we have it, the second tale of the Red Dragon of Wales, the one that most grown-ups I knew when I was a child would tell me. This was the story that they were most familiar with, the story of the dragon living in the Cambrian mountains and then raging across into England and back and fighting the white dragon. But for me, it's not as interesting a tale as the one last week. I mean, that's not fair. It is an interesting tale, but I love the story of Merlin and Vortigern and the Tower and also Snowdonia is so close to my home. It just felt like, oh yes, that's mine. That's my, I felt like I could sort of take a little bit of ownership of that. But this story is a prequel, and it's seemingly written afterwards, but may well have its origins earlier. It's complicated, isn't it? When we take folk histories and oral traditions and attempt to confine them on the page with the written word. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Thank you for listening. Look after yourselves. Take care. Bye-bye.